Lots of people feel anxious from time to time. You might get a knot in your stomach before rolling a saving throw, or stress about getting ready to run a game session. That's just a normal part of being a human. But what if your worry doesn't go away, but in fact gets worse? Negative or obsessive thoughts can overtake your mind to the point where it's hard for you to handle everyday situations. Now, the reason I bring up this real-world issue in terms of Dungeons & Dragons is that even in these fantastic worlds of ours, people are still people, whether they look like us, lions, rabbits, birds, or even robots. Yet, in the dangerous world of Dungeons & Dragons, even one's thoughts and emotions can try to kill you. The murderous emotions, the bad thought, the troubled tulpa. Let's talk about the Phthisic. So what are we going to be covering? In this episode, first we're going to talk about what a Phthisic is. Next, we're going to dive into its origins. After that, we're going to explore how I rebuilt the Phthisic for the 2024 edition of D&D and how they fare in combat. We'll close out then with some ideas about how to add the Phthisic not only as a monster of the week, but as part of an ongoing campaign. Now, before we dive deep into the Phthisic, despite what I originally thought, the word Phthisic is actually a real term. By definition, a Phthisic is a wasting illness of the lungs, such as asthma or tuberculosis, which, by the by, is not how it's used in D&D at all. But we'll get into that. I'm also sure I'm mispronouncing Phthisic. I looked up guides on how to say it. This is as close as I can get. Apologies if it offends. Now, back to the subject at hand. Originating in 2nd edition of D&D, the Phthisic also showed up in the 3rd edition book, Psionic's Handbook, with a few changes such as their origins being unknown, although speculated to be the product of psychic surgery. I actually prefer the flavor of the Phthisic in 2nd edition because A, we get a lot of flavor and connections to the world, so that's where I'm mostly going to be pulling from for my version of the Phthisic. So what are Phthisics? Even though they are creatures of flesh and bone, Phthisics are considered a repressed neurosis given life, carved from a mortal's mind and eternally hungry for the mental energy of other creatures. Born from the turmoil, the self-deprecation, and inner doubt of an intelligent being, the Phthisic appears as an enlarged and twisted reflection from the person from whom it was taken from. This 10-foot tall and 600-pound humanoid is monstrously distorted, gaining unnatural features such as the classic physical horror tropes of horns and tentacles. Yet the creature almost looks like the person from whom it came from, possibly even recognizable if you knew the individual and you really squinted your eyes. As you can imagine, life isn't great for the Phthisic, who is constantly craving the mental energy and sanity of the mortal minds, if only to temporarily soothe its own mental torment, meaning it's going to eat your brains so it can bandage its own. Who would create such a monstrous humanoid? Wrench the negative parts of a person and force it to walk in the world as a living, breathing creature, ever needing the mental energies of others to survive. If there's any sort of mind terror combined with body horror in the worlds of D&D, you can probably find the tentacles of the mind flayers wiggling about nearby. Well, the 3rd edition said that the Phthisic was initially drawn from the troubled psyche by an unknown psionic power. I actually prefer how 2nd edition answered it. See, in 2nd edition, the Phthisic were specifically the creations of the mind flayers, the only creatures skilled enough to draw them from the minds of their thralls. Mind flayers, also known as the Illithids, are sadistic aberrations feared by sentient creatures from across the multiverse due to their powerful psionic abilities and habit of eating brains. Although the brains must be tasty, the mind flayers are capable of so much more horror, and psionic surgery is certainly not beyond them. In fact, they occasionally do it to themselves. How it's supposed to work is that mind flayers have no memory of the previous host. When the tadpole turns them, there's not supposed to be anything left. That being said, it's not unheard of for them to suffer what they call partialism, the incomplete sublimation of a host's mind. Like I said, normally there's nothing supposed to be there once a host is turned. With partialism, bits of memory and personalities of the previous body can show up in the mind flayer, such as humming subconsciously or tapping their fingers. It's possible, if extremely uncommon, for a host body's complete memory to survive the conversion process. The Emperor from Baldur's Gate 3 is an example of this. Let it be known that mind flayers despise partialism as a whole. After all, mind flayers believe themselves superior, so how dare the remnants of a lesser mind intrude upon perfection? Partialism is so hated that even elder brains will reject mind flayers that have even the subconscious acts. Upon discovering that it suffers from partialism, it's not uncommon for a mind flayer to attempt to remove the affected portions of their brain through psychic surgery, or real surgery if it comes to that. I bring this up as an example of the mind flayer's ability to perform psychic surgery that is needed to create a Phthisic. A skilled illithid would certainly be capable of reaching in and retching out a Phthisic from the unconscious mind, and physically embodying it in a living, breathing creature. But why would they bother? While diving into the lore of the Phthisic, I actually wasn't initially finding a good reason for why the mind flayers would create them. So in this case, I felt like I needed to look to see what the Phthisic was capable of before we can really understand why, the reason why they were created. Coming in at a challenge rating of 6, Phthisics are both brute and skirmishers. These aberrations want to get up close and personal. For the most part, they are melee combatants, and they're pretty fast. However, they're also pretty tough monsters with plenty of psionic tricks up their sleeves, but we'll get into that. They are resilient to bludgeoning, slashing, and piercing, with a bonus resistance to cold and psychic damage. They're tough. They can take a beating. As for actually harming its victims, while its claws are nothing to ignore, like the mind flayer, the Phthysic's bite is far, far worse. In previous editions of D&D, the brain drain came in the form of anyone bitten by the Phthisic had to make a saving throw or suffer the effects of the feeble mind spell. If the Phthisic fed on the victim in peace, i.e. out of combat, and this victim was feeble-minded, each bite permanently drained 1 point of intelligence. For my rebuild in 5th edition, I decided not to go with this two-step process because, well, why wait to eat brains? Taking a cue from the shadow, the bite of the Phthisic reduces the target's intelligence by 1d4 and no save involved. Wizards and artificers aren't going to be a fan, but I would say the other classes will certainly be scared of that bite too. Their abilities might not be dependent on intelligence, but that's the problem, since it's very likely that the other classes will use intelligence as their dump stat. A few good bites will drop the barbarian no matter how many hit points or rages they have left. Clearly harsher than the previous manifestation of the bite attack, but I felt like the old mechanic was clumsy and there wasn't a clean way of implementing it. I feel like just the straight intelligence drain is both cleaner and way more terrifying. It's worth noting that when a Phthisic fed upon a feeble-minded victim in 2nd edition, their survivors would experience the intelligent drain as a deathly chill, like the heat was being drained from them. As a secondary application of this death chill, the Phthisic is capable of temporarily surrounding themselves with an aura of cold strong enough to deal damage to anything within 10 feet, as if going into melee with this thing wasn't bad enough. Mechanically, I treated this like an area of effect Frost Nova-like ability, giving it a recharge instead of a once-a-day ability like its original form, in order to help keep the party on their toes and make ganging up on a Phthisic a dangerous proposition. For those that wisely try to keep away and to deal with those pesky spellcasters, Phthisics have a wide range of psionic powers to make their lives just as miserable. As of when I post this, the 2024/5th edition doesn't treat psionic abilities as a radically different set of mechanics like it was in the previous editions. 5th edition treats them like spells or just actions that are flavored with psychic power, which is how I'm going to treat the Phthisics power. Basically, I looked up the 3rd edition version of whatever the psionic ability was, and then found something either similar in 5th edition that I could just tweak it, or if there was a spell that already replicated it, I basically found something that worked and then tweaked it. For example, the Mind Thrust I made into a limited use range attack that deals psychic damage to keep spellcasters and archers honest, as well as cripple a target at range until the Phthisic could get up close and personal like it wants to. Dimension Slide allows the Phthisic to do just that, get close by teleporting around and reaching those delicious brains even quicker. Finally, Mental Barrier is there to protect itself against many mental style attacks, giving advantage to resist them. If all of that wasn't bad enough, Phthisics are nearly impossible to kill thanks to a troll-style regeneration. This regeneration will bring a Phthisic back from the dead if not properly damaged with fire, acid, or, this one might sound weird, psychic damage. Psychic damage wasn't originally how the regen was negated, but in 2nd edition, Phthisics were noted to be creatures of the mind, and thus Feeble Mind and Confusion spells would deal actual damage to them on top of nullifying their regeneration. In 5th edition, having a spell that normally doesn't do damage would be complicated. It would be a heavy-handed trait. Adding psychic damage to negate the regeneration was a nod to the previous edition while being a lot cleaner. Fun fact, Phthisics are resistant to psychic damage. So in order to help negate the regen, players are going to have to throw damage that they know is going to be halved. Yet this regen alone is not why it's so hard to permanently put down a Phthisic. Its seal is. In 2nd edition, a Phthisic is mental energy made flesh, and thus it requires mental energies of others to survive. However, it's noted in 2nd edition, while the Phthisics require the sustenance of a living mind for nourishment, they cannot stray too far or too long away from their generative source. What is this generative source? A complex psionic circuitry known as a psionic seal. This seal is embedded into some large inanimate object. Essentially, it's an anchor. The Mind Flayers rip out the mental energies that will become the Phthisic, and then these energies are bound, anchored into the material world through these psionic seals. The way the seal works, this sort of reminds me of how ghosts in some stories work. They're bound to an object. This object or anchor is what keeps a ghost bound to the physical world instead of it moving on to whatever place is in the afterlife. The ghosts must remain close to their anchors at all time, whether they manifest or not. If the anchor is destroyed, the ghost is banished into the afterlife. Even though they're classified in previous editions as monstrous humanoids and aberrations by myself, the Phthisic feels like they have a lot in common with the ghost. It's made of the essence of the living, it hates the living, it drains the living of their energy. Some ghosts in media are more like echoes of a person's emotions, and that's basically what a Phthisic is, except it's flesh instead of ephemeral. With that comparison in mind, The psionic seal makes sense as a means to bind and keep the Phthisic in reality. The seal gives the Phthisic a sort of lifelike state, but it traps it into an existence within 3 miles of the seal. Adding to the ghost comparisons, the destruction of the psionic seal permanently destroys the Phthisic. With all that in mind, how do Phthisics fare in combat? In one word, answers. Look at their toolkit. A Phthisic has a lot of tricks up their sleeves to deal with situations that come up. Almost no matter what the party attempts, it will have a response. As a monster that wants to get up close and personal, Phthisics should be as aggressive as possible. To back up that aggression, Phthisics are aberrations that are hard to put down. Impossible, really, considering the psionic seal. Even before that point, Phthisics get resistance to the 3 basic damage types on top of cold and psychic. That means a lot of damage that's coming their way is going to get reduced. And any damage they take is likely to get negated entirely thanks to the regeneration. The claws are a nice bit of damage, but the real star of the show is its bite and its ability to drain away intelligence. That's the real party killer. Its intelligence and wisdom is high enough to know to put down the folks most capable of spewing fire, acid, and psychic damage to stop its regeneration. Not only that, it's unlikely that the fighter, barbarian, paladin, and most of the other classes that like to get up close and personal have a high intelligence, so a few bites might be enough to kill the meat shields in a disturbingly quick manner. Even with that threat of intelligence drain, paladins, barbarians, and fighters are still going to want to get up close and personal. If too many of them do get close, the aura of cold is going to make them regret that action. Fighting the Phthisic at range is no help either, since it can either use its dimension slide to get up close, or its mind thrust to deal psychic damage and remove actions from the target. Maybe a crowd control spell? Even then, the Phthisic has its mental barrier that covers a lot of the traditional crowd control spell saves. Like I said, the Phthisic always has a response, which I like. Appropriately, the Phthisic gives off a cosmic horror vibe, and a fight with one should seem like no matter what you do, it keeps coming. It attacks the mind, quite literally, with that bite. Back to my original question. Why would a mind flayer create such a monster? Mind flayers eat brains. One of their actions is to have their mouth tentacles reach into a victim's head to get a hold of that juicy gray matter. Creating a monster that literally drains away intelligence seems counterproductive to helping the mind flayer get a meal, since they're literally draining away the flavor or the nutrients. Do they help the mind flayer's goals? Part of the Illithid's grand design philosophy involves the reestablishment of their once great empire, using their potent psionic powers to enslave the humanoid mind. Once again, the Phthisic appears to be counterproductive. Phthisics drain intelligence until there is a corpse, and mind flayers need a living mind to control. Sure, a mind flayer could probably command a Phthisic to stop while the victim is still alive, but the background of the Phthisic seems like the mind flayers create and bind the creature to a location and then move on. I think that's the key to why a mind flayer would create a Phthisic. It's a secret-keeping guard dog. Why a Phthisic instead of one of the other mind flayer creations comes down to that intelligence-draining bite. Should an outsider stumble upon the mind flayer's secret, the other creations will try to kill them, but that might not be enough. It might not be enough to keep that secret hidden. Psionic powers and divine magic are both fully capable of speaking with the dead, making them reveal what they once knew. A Phthisic is the hammer approach to getting rid of that knowledge. Even if a cleric casts Speak with Dead on a corpse, that spell will only allow them to speak what they knew when they died, And thanks to that intelligence drain, they won't know anything. That's at least my theory about how the Mind Flayers would use a Phthisic. Now, what about DMs? While a Mind Flayer story can certainly have a Phthisic involved, I think Phthisics themselves are set up to be the center of a mystery that the players can stumble upon. One of these mysteries could be that the party has been hired by a lord to investigate a series of mysterious deaths that have occurred. Nothing that a little speak with the dead can't fix. Except the corpses have been unable to utter a singular word to the party, their mouths left open and their eyes vacant. During the investigation, the party eventually discovers that a Phthisic is responsible for this. But that is where the twist comes in. Well, clearly a Phthisic is the one doing the murdering. What if it's not the true culprit? Say at the local prestigious academy, there's a professor that has been repeatedly overlooked by the higher-ups for promotions and impressive research opportunities. Basically, there's a whole bunch of academics that this professor would love to get back at. This professor discovers the Phthisic and what it can do. This professor comes up with a downright evil plan, luring those he despises into the tunnels. If they somehow manage to survive the Phthisic attack, their brains are going to be mush, which seems like perfect punishment in the professor's eyes, especially if we allow NPCs not to be able to recover the intelligence with a long rest, like PCs can. While investigating, the party could discover the connection between all the victims being the academy, possibly drawing enough attention to themselves that the professor approaches them and suggests he heard a few strange things coming from the tunnels below the academy. Given that Phthisics are in part the thoughts of the original creature, it's entirely possible they still retain some of the memories of the original victim. Even the Mind Flayers can recall tiny aspects of their previous life, so why not Phthisics? With this idea, you can sort of do a twisted take on RoboCop. Yes, the Phthisic isn't really the original person, but it does have some of the memories of them. The party could encounter a family who's lost their mother and believes that they're being stalked by a bizarre monster, the youngest child swearing that it looks like their mother. The Phthisic doesn't appear to be dangerous to the family, but to those around them, killing those that it thinks is a threat to the family. Perhaps it doesn't even know why it's doing it. I could see the Phthisic even kidnapping the family and holding them hostage, trying to bring its family back together, forcing the party to save them before it's too late. Another take on the fragments of the original victim's memories is, what if the players are looking for an expert in a long-lost piece of knowledge, and that person's dead, and well beyond magic's ability to get a hold of them? Lucky for those players, and maybe a DM, that individual was once the victim of a Phthisic, and that knowledge that the party is looking for is with that still living monster. There's the rub. How do you extract information from a Phthisic? Heck, if I know, but that sounds like the party has a lot on their hands trying to solve the puzzle. Taking the concept of memory drain one step further, say the Phthisic doesn't kill anyone, but instead drains them of memories along with that intelligence. Say a big bad of this scenario has gotten their hands on the psionic seal, forcing the Phthisic to serve it. Why does the big bad need a memory draining monster? For murder, of course. I think this can lead to a whodunit, a murder mystery with a bunch of guests, including the party, with a dead body and no one's sure who did it. The party obviously is the only ones who can solve it. Could it be the Phthisic? Perhaps one of the guests and the Phthysic's arrival just is happenstance. Maybe someone lured it in to get rid of memories of what happened that night. Maybe even the big bad had their memory wiped, so not even they know what happened. Can the players solve a mystery where no one knows the truth? In conclusion, Phthisics ended up being way more terrifying to me than their challenge rating of 6 implied when I first started digging into them. I thought Strength Drain of the Shadows was pretty horrific, but the Phthisics draining of intelligence is utterly nightmarish. Think of the implications, especially with so many adventurers particularly vulnerable to intelligence loss, because most of them use intelligence as a dump stat. I think Phthisics are a twist on the horrific abominations of the Mind Flayers or psionic powers in general. Their sucking of brains in a unique way is sure to leave your players utterly confused, and fighting for their very lives should you bring a Phthisic into your adventures. And I think that's just neat. In the description below, I have a link to the monster block stat for the Phthisic updated to the 2024 edition of Dungeons & Dragons, ready for you to unleash upon your players. Channel update, this marks the 3rd video we've officially put out, so happy to hear any feedback about how they're being received. As we are a growing channel, if you found this interesting, please leave a like and subscribe for all our future videos. It really does mean the world to us. Let me thank all of you for your time and wishing you the best until we meet again for our next monster.